When an air raid siren wails across a city in the Middle East, the rhythm of daily life fractures. Civilians suddenly have a 60-second window to drop what they are doing and sprint to the nearest bunker. These fortified rooms are heavily engineered to keep the human body intact. Thick concrete walls absorb primary blast overpressure, the initial wave of intense air pressure, while steel doors block the secondary spread of shrapnel and flying rubble. But while the people huddled inside remain safe from the physical explosion outside, they are exposed to an invisible blast wave washing over their minds. The bunker succeeds in protecting flesh and bone, but as families wait in the dark, anticipating a strike, these confined spaces act as pressure cookers for the brain, leaving psychological wounds entirely unshielded. Parents in conflict zones describe sitting in narrow hallways for hours with emergency go bags, holding their breath while listening for the next explosion. These families exist in a state of constant, agonizing anticipation. This state of hypervigilance causes a child's brain to generalize fear. Months later, even in a safe environment, a simple knock on the door or a dropped book triggers the same panicked screaming and hiding as an incoming rocket. Biologists call this toxic stress. It is the non-stop activation of the body's survival hormones, caused by a constant fear of death or separation from loved ones. The neurological damage begins long before a missile actually impacts, driven by the sheer weight of anticipating the blast. We are used to discussing post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, but researchers studying civilians in Gaza and other active conflict zones use the term continuous traumatic stress disorder, or CTSD. CTSD is a psychological state resulting from threats that are constant and unpredictable. For a population under the constant threat of air raids, there is no post-stage to their trauma. The psychological assault merely hits a pause until the next siren echoes through the streets. Chronic CTSD exhausts the body and prevents the brain from returning to a calm baseline state. This state of high alert leads to symptoms like emotional detachment, sudden, unpredictable aggression, and profound despair. The suffering is shared through mirror neurons, specialized brain cells that allow us to feel empathy. Simply witnessing others in severe distress triggers identical biological stress responses in the observer, a process known as secondary trauma. In these heavily bombarded regions, trauma functions as a persistent environmental toxin, something entire communities are forced to breathe daily. To understand the toll of this environment, we have to look at the microscopic biology of a developing child's brain. When a child is exposed to a relentless wash of the stress hormone cortisol, it reduces the number of active neural connections. This chemical flood hinders the physical development of the brain and other major organs. This cellular disconnection leads to long-term impairments. Children facing toxic stress show higher rates of learning disabilities, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and maladaptive coping skills. The terror of an air raid siren physically dismantles a child's cognitive foundation. The biological damage of war does not stop with the individuals currently sitting in those bomb shelters. It travels forward in time through a mechanism called epigenetics. Research on Holocaust survivors and Vietnam veterans has demonstrated that extreme trauma leaves physical markers that span multiple generations. Through DNA methylation, chemical tags attach to DNA, altering gene expression. In war zones, these stress-induced tags physically attach to reproductive cells. Children born decades later inherit this biological memory, exhibiting severe anxiety and stress responses as if they lived through the bombardment themselves. Current conflicts in the Middle East are writing a genetic legacy of trauma, a biological scar that will outlast the physical destruction of the cities. Yet, the scientific consensus on resilience offers a way forward. These epigenetic modifications and trauma markers are not a permanent destiny. Biology is malleable. With targeted early intervention and sustained community solidarity, these genetic stress markers can be reversed. Right now, global attention and billions of dollars are focused on rebuilding physical infrastructure, like roads and homes. But there is an equally urgent need to rebuild psychological infrastructure. True recovery requires treating this mental health crisis with the same priority as a collapsed building. We must address it now, before the terror of today's sirens becomes the inherited biological baseline of tomorrow's children.